India is the land of seekers. What does that mean? Seeker means a person who challenges the status quo, who asks questions and wanting to know the right answers. And I think we are here today as a great gathering to have answers for these questions that we have for so many years. World tea production. We cannot not talk about production and move forward. As our previous panel was also talking about, in 2024 we produced 7 billion kilos of tea. 7 billion with a B. And though we produce that amount of tea, we are not jumping up and down about it simply because we smell trouble in not having enough consumption to catch up with the production that we do. With this said, with the current stats that we have in 2025 mid-year, we will continue to produce approximately 7.28 billion kilos in 2025. The world tea supply. Oversupply is what we are worried about. We have had a grips on this oversupply up until 2004. If you look at the graph, it has been quite manageable. But since 2004 up until 2012, it has kind of gone beyond our control. But the last decade in particular, we have had a huge surpluses from 200 million kilos up to 350 million kilos. 2024 was an anomaly. But in numbers terms, if you really analyze it, this 200 to 350 million kilos in comparison to what we produce, it's about 4 to 6%. This is not to downplay the problem we have. Numerically, more we produce, the 4 to 6% is going to be higher. How do we manage that? Going back to the previous slide, what can we do, one might ask? Well, obvious two answers is to reduce production and to increase consumption. But reducing production is not as easy as we say, because it is linked to the livelihoods of millions and millions of producers. Why saying that? Some of the factors that has helped towards oversupply or production has been also to do with advancements, the technological advances, scientific advances, the machine plucking in huge quantities to high-yielding clones through new research has also contributed towards this production. But the best option would be to manage this. And consumption, how do we increase consumption? I think we've discussed this previously briefly as well. I personally feel that there is a huge knowledge gap that we need to bridge between the producer and the end consumer. And that would be the ideal way to go about it, have a hybrid situation. India, what can India provide us with this scenario? India has been producing huge number of kilos, as you know. You're the second largest producer and also the second largest consumer in the world. Just to give you context, how big your consumption is, if you compare the third largest consumer, which is Turkey, India is about 4.5 times bigger than Turkey. Fourth being Pakistan, you're about 5.5 to 6 times bigger than Pakistan. So this is how big you are. and how important India is. With this said, India will have a great production this year, everything looking in order to produce 1.4 billion to 1.45 billion this year, correcting last year's a drop in quantity. What's India's potential? I was thinking. There was a survey done by the Tea Board of India last year, and the results came. The Indian consumption is increasing by 2% CAGR. The interesting point was that this could be increased further by promotional work and advertisements to knowledge sharing to 2.5 to 2.7%, which is a huge jump. The per capita consumption is 840 grams. This is not something that we should be jumping up and down, because there are certain other countries who consume 2.5 to 3 kilos. But having said that, this 840 has become 840 over the last 2 decades. It was 600 grams 2 decades ago. So it is growing, and the consumption increasing. We could estimate this per capita consumption to be 1 kilogram within the next 1 to 1.5 decades. In fact, some of the regions of India currently do consume more than 1 kilo per head, especially the urban areas. Population growth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that we should not be taken lightly. We are standing on the most populous nation in the world. 1.45 billion people and growing. We are growing at 0.89% per annum year on year. And estimates are that we will grow to be 1.7 billion by 2064. That is 40 years of growth. And with this consumption rate, you can work the numbers out. Economically, India is the 4th largest economy in the world today. And rising middle income and then disposable income. Well, we can't ask for any better ingredients than this to have a fantastic, fantastic market. It is just understanding or realizing whether we are going to be baking a great cake or a lousy one with this is up to us. Can India add more value? I'm just wanting to skim through this, because Mr. Cook and George are going to be comparing the countries, I believe. If you take the auction averages, all auction centers of India versus Kenya is fetching around $2, give or take, in 2024. When it comes to exports, Kenya is adding $2.20, whereas India is exporting at adding $1.20. Brilliant. But what can we learn from Sri Lanka? Sri Lankan auction average price is $4.04 and exports at $5.84. And India, $2.02, exports at $3.23. Sri Lanka adds $1.80 to do $2 per kg. Of course, the split of the production is 90% orthodox versus 10% or less than 10% CTC, whereas India is adding $1.20 with more than 90% or 90% CTC. With an additional 60p or 80p, if you are able to gain that, we are talking about adding another $200 million into your export revenue, which means your current 800 million export revenue could go up to 1 billion with value addition. Global market. Thankfully, the global market is growing. It is growing. It was at 282 billion last year. It is expected to be almost 300 billion by 2025. USA, the big elephant in the room. As Dan discussed the different tariff rates, I want to drill into what does this mean to India in particular. In 2024, the graph is in green, and 2025 is in red. The first half we have had volume terms. This is a lot of front loading, and there is a dip to avoid the taxation or tariffs coming into play. Is numbers wise, in 2024, Indian imports to US was the second highest, representing 11%, 13.2 million kilos. Second to Argentina, there were 47 million kilos. What does that mean to India from the Indian side of it? It represented 6.3% of the total Indian exports in volume terms. Let's look at the value. Value graph is fairly similar. But in value terms, India is again second highest to US, 65 million, behind Japan. I want to look at this number from Japan. $106 million with just 3.3 million kilos. So it goes to show that quantity is always not the answer. Also, if you look at it from the Indian side of it, value-wise, Indian exports to US was 8.7%, which means the quantity was 6.3%, value terms 8.7, which means India is punching above waist, which is great. But with this tariff, what can we do? What will happen to these markets? This will be the question. Of course, our hope is that we'll be able to negotiate and come to equal terms with our neighboring nations. But if not, other alternatives will be negotiating to see who is taking the bigger haircut. Or if not, the lesser quality tea is going into that market. And the other alternative would be the re-export hubs being able to do the work if that is feasible. Worst scenario being the other neighboring nations fulfilling that market gap. So this is a threat, and we need to find solutions. I hope that will be our seeking that we'll be doing during these sessions. With this, I just want to make the final call for action is, remember I said India is the nation of seekers. India is also the nation of yogis. Yoga literally means union with nature. Tea is the nature's nectar to the world. And you and I and everyone here are the custodians of that. We are called upon to be ambassadors of this great beverage. My only request, if you forget everything else, doesn't matter. Only request is, let's go out there, shout out from top of the mountains about the goodness of tea, and let's bring hope to tea again. Thank you very much.